Customer service, done right, can be your company's single biggest competitive advantage. Welcome to the Customer Service Revolution. Join customer service authority and best-selling author John DiJulius as he interviews leaders who are revolutionizing their industries. This is more than a podcast, though. It's a movement. The Customer Service Revolution is a radical overthrow of conventional business mentality designed to transform what customers and employees experience. If you are a revolutionary customer service leader who's ready to stop competing on price and obsessed with building a brand that people cannot live without, this podcast is for you.
Welcome back to another episode of the Customer Service Revolution podcast. I am John DiJulius, Chief Revolution Officer of the DiJulius Group. I'm so pumped to be speaking to Dr. Sandeep Palakodeti, MD. Dr. Deep has over 2 decades of experience in longevity, medicine, and preventative health care. He is recognized for his commitment to improving population health outcomes through empathetic, holistic approach to medicine. As the CEO and founder of Velocity Health, a nationwide digital-first concierge precision medicine clinic, Dr. Deep saw a grave disconnect in how traditional medicine was practiced. It was highly reactive, short on time, and impersonal. Velocity aims to be the beacon for what healthcare should actually look like and feel like. Deeply personalized, proactive, preventative, attentive, and catered to the individual. Velocity Health serves CEOs, founders, executives, athletes, and anyone seeking to optimize the prime of their lives. Welcome, Dr. Deep.
Thank you, John. Very happy to be here. Appreciate that intro and excited for our conversation today.
Yeah, I'm really excited. And you are, I believe, in Columbus, Ohio?
That's right. I am right outside.
Nice. And you have locations all over. Give us a little background on Velocity Health.
Yeah, Velocity Health is a digital-first national clinic. So we are all 50 states. We've got doctors all across the country. Our team is all across the country. We're licensed in all 50 states, and we serve members wherever they are.
And explain to us what digital first looks like.
So Velocity is a concierge precision medicine clinic. We really came to Velocity. You mentioned a little bit of it in the bio there, but just to give you a little bit more context, I'm a physician. My father's a physician. My brother's a physician. I grew up around healthcare and really grew up around seeing how broken healthcare was and trying to understand how we can fix it. I think every one of us has a story about healthcare that is less than ideal, whether it's ourselves, our families. And so as I continue to go through my medical training and started to see patients, the average time in this country that we get with our patients is about 12 minutes. We have 30, average primary care doc in this country has around 2,500 patients on their panel. And that's why we all feel like a number in sort of the broader scheme of things. That's why we feel like we're just being rushed through and from the waiting room and spending just a few minutes with our doc and moving on. And so, it never sort of sat right with me as a clinician. And, I don't have the greatest genetics. I have 3 grandparents who died in their 60s from heart attacks. Both my parents have heart disease and diabetes. My dad had his first heart attack when he was 58, I think. And so I have got 2 young toddlers as well at home. And I look at them and I don't really want to limp through the next 20 years. I want to really engineer what that looks like and try to have as much success as possible. And so we came to starting Velocity because we didn't really find a clinic like this around the country that really understood us personally, deeply, from the ground up, from the genetic code through everything about our lives. And so, Velocity is meant to be digital first in that we are, providing access to people all across the country. We're meant for people who might not be in the same zip code for too long and who are too busy to spend 4 hours coming downtown battling the traffic in the parking garage just to spend that 12 minutes of time with their doc. So patients come in, they are assigned a concierge who helps them sort of navigate through the system, a health coach, or we call them a human performance specialist, who really wraps around them and helps them understand what the doctor's plan was, how to incorporate that into your life, what your barriers to that might be, checks in on you to make sure you're doing what you said you were going to do. And then you have a longevity Healthspan trained physician who, where most of us are either internal medicine or family medicine trained. We have learned and unlearned a lot about American healthcare. There's a whole science around longevity now that takes a lot. So we go very deep on the diagnostics. I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit, but then patients spend 90 minutes with their physician quarterly. We go through all those, things like biomarkers and coronary scans and full body MRIs and cancer screenings and talk about all of that. And because we're 50 state licensed, we do things like peptides, we do things like hormone replacement therapy, and we do all the sort of advanced diagnostics and therapeutics. So, we're meant for people who are maybe waking up in their 40s and 50s and are balancing a lot and are thinking, man, I've just sort of missed a beat. I'm not moving like I used to. I can't get rid of that stubborn 10 or 20 pounds. I'm not as cognitively sharp as I need to be into my meetings in the afternoon. I can't show up for my kids in the evening like I want to. And it's not just part of aging. I think that there's a real science underneath what's happening there. And so we put that all together, understand what's happening for each individual and try to optimize that prime for each person.
I love this. This is near and dear to my heart. Some of our listeners will, maybe wondering why are we talking about this on a customer service revolution podcast, and to give some context to it. The last chapter of, probably my best-selling book of all my books is titled Living an Extraordinary Life So Countless Others Do. And that has and I finish every presentation, consulting, whatever I do with like an excerpt or something about living an extraordinary life. And, so just to give some context for our listeners, I don't want to live an extraordinary life only, I guess, to say, I have more bigger houses, cars, trips, bank accounts. Like I genuinely feel that we all have seeds of potential, right? And the undeveloped potential that we don't develop cheats those around us, those we touch, influence, and impact, as well as deprive ourselves of joy, satisfaction, and opportunity. And so living our life to its fullest potential, to me, is not an opportunity. It's a responsibility, right? It's an obligation to be the best version of ourselves we possibly can be every day, not just in for us and how our life will benefit for all the people that are dependent on us, spouse, children, friends, employees, coworkers, customers, clients, patients, community. And, I take that very, very seriously and feel, that. So I have a report card. It's kind of, different, but, what do you call your markers? Biomarkers?
Yep.
So my biomarkers, and again, it's not the same, is I look at, nine buckets of if I'm living an extraordinary life. And listen, more often I'm not. And so that's where I go to. It's like, who am I hanging out with? What am I feeding my brain? All those types. What am I eating? Workouts, all that stuff. And I, have become obsessed with it. And similar to you, my parents died young and they were old. They were old, 60. My mom died at 69. And she might as well have been 90 something. It's a different generation, different lifestyle, different education, of what they knew. But while this has always been a primary compass, I advertise this to myself on my bathroom mirrors and everything, living extraordinary life, blah, blah, blah. Where it really got, serious is 17 years ago, I lost my wife. And so now I have 3 little boys that I need to it can't be just lip service, right? I can't orphan them, have anything. So I like totally got obsessed. Thank God. I also found aging, turning 40, turning 50 was a good thing because I saw differences. I saw that I couldn't eat whatever I wanted. I saw that I couldn't, do whatever and bounce back like we could in our 20s and 30s, which was great. I felt it was, getting old was a good thing because it, made me take things more seriously. So all those things became, really important. I, got in with a concierge. I've been doing a lot of these things for decades, and I'm not embarrassed to tell anyone I'm having a conversation with. I will tell them I'm on testosterone, I'm on GLP-1s. Like, I take advantage of what could be there. And again, I want you to tell me where I'm off and all those things. But we have so much, technology and so many more resources. And then just to try to, close this off, whether I live to 70, 80, 90, I don't care. I want it to be a young 70, 80, or 90. And I don't want my kids having to, do what I had to do for my mother. Right. And just, be that burden onto them. And so I guess my first question is, how much of how we turn out and how we end up with the potential of dementia, Parkinson's, all these other things, how much is genetic and how much do we control? Because, and tell me if I'm wrong, I feel like how I take care of myself in my 40s, 50s, 60s determines my quality of life later on. I hope I'm right, but I guess that's my first question to you is am I on the right path? Is it no, I have bad genetics, forget about it, might as well drink and party my ass off, or I can reduce those risks?
Yeah, first of all, thank you. And I think it's a really good context for why we're even having this conversation. Just to respond to one thing there, I wrote a book, and one of the chapters is really about, why are human beings even around after the age of reproduction? And a lot of other species kind of reproduce and die, but then we have this long post-reproductive period, and there's only a few other species that do. And when you look at them, things like elephants and wolves and others, a lot of times there's this matriarch effect, is what we call it, the grandmother effect, where having the knowledge of wisdom of someone who's been around the block, who knows, has experienced things in this world, is important for the evolution of the species as a whole. And I think what's ironic is that, especially in one's 40s and 50s, and you mentioned it as you hit those sort of aging milestones, the exact decades when you should be imparting this wisdom that you've gained over all of these years and decades is the exact decades where our biological entropy starts to set in as well, where our systems start to break down, unless we're extremely sort of conscientious about it and we take a very clear path to structuring our health rather than letting it sort of just happen to us. And so, you asked the kind of classic nature versus nurture question around how much is genetically predispositioned. And, there's some things that are obviously genetic where you can't sort of get away from it. It's something like Tay-Sachs disease or whatever that we screen for genetically now, where you're pretty much guaranteed 100% to have this manifestation of these conditions. But I think what we're mostly talking about in this discussion are chronic diseases. What are the polygenic? What are all the various risk factors that I have? It's not as easy as saying, yes, you have the gene, or no, you don't, so you are going to get this disease or not. There's a very good example. One is called your ApoE gene, ApoE gene. This codes for how our brains process cholesterol, saturated fats. It is very highly correlated with our risk of downstream dementia. And so some people have the ApoE3 gene. You have a 3 from your mother, 3 from your father. That is what most of the population has. Something like 75% of the population has it. If you have a 4 from either parent, you have about a 5 times higher chance of developing dementia than the than the baseline population. If you have 2 4s, you have about a 12 times higher chance of developing dementia. So I say that because, yes, there's a genetic component to something very complex like dementia, but is that deterministic? Does that mean if you have 2 4 variants, you're definitely going to get dementia? No, it means, your risk went from, 0.1% or 0.5% up to 5 or 10%, which is not nothing. But what are all the things that we can do to prevent that? We do know that really good sleep, really good cardiovascular exercise, decreasing your cholesterol burden, improving your metabolic health with your blood sugars, all of these things can help. And so I'm very much of the belief that nurture, meaning our environment and the things that we do, have a much bigger impact on us than most of us believe. And on the genetic side, we are starting to more understand concepts like epigenetics, where we can turn on and off certain genes by certain activity. Even something very interesting, like they've done studies on children who have played in the dirt and done gardening and things like that. And it literally turns on different genes that code for different proteins and have different expression in their lives. And so even something like our genetics, which we think is hardwired, are actually quite malleable through this epigenetic kind of phenomenon. And so I'd say we are all born with a certain, hand, and we're dealt that certain hand, but through our environment, through our nurturing, we can force those in certain directions.
And, statistically, whether it's the US or globally, are we living longer as a society?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's interesting when you look at some of the statistics about, we used to only live to 40 and 50, and that's not actually true. It's not like most people died at 40 and 50. It's just that we had a really high infant mortality rate as well, and many more people died in young adulthood from accidents or infections or things like that, that now
Dinosaurs.
yeah, whatever, right? Things like that we could cure. And so that drags down the average. We still had people living to their 80s and 90s, thousands of years ago, but it just wasn't as common because there's so many more things that could sort of take you out. But now when we actually look at the actual true population statistics, yes, we're definitely living longer now. And, if you're a person of means in a developed country, you're very likely to live well into your 80s at this point. Now, you sort of mentioned it, John, in your initial dialogue, which is most of us do not want to live into our 90s and 100s and not be able to care for ourselves. Functional independence is what we want, right? We want to be able to be sound of mind, sound of body and spirit, and be able to take care of ourselves and not be dependent on others. And that is the science piece that we're starting to understand a little bit and be able to engineer a little bit more as time goes on as well.
So you mentioned your book, which is The Ultimate Asset, the title, The Ultimate Asset, Extend Your Prime, Not Just Your Lifespan. And I'm going to put it in the show notes, a link to Amazon, unless you wanted a link somewhere else.
Oh, that's perfect. Yep.
Good. That's awesome. So I also want to unpackage the traditional, medicine and your, physician, family physician versus the concierge program, which, I don't want to assume everyone knows. And you kind of, led with this. But yeah, I've had, in the past, before I went with the concierge program, and I cannot talk highly enough about it, is, in the past, I could be having some problem, right? And I don't care what the problem is, right? It could be, on the grand scheme of things, my problem may pale in comparison to someone else's, but it's still my problem, right?
Yeah.
It could be back pain. It could be, I've had, because I still play hardball at this old age, I've had both shoulders replaced. But, if you have a problem and you're like, all right, I need to get in with a specialist, or I need to go see my doctor. And then you hear, his first opening is, 2 months from now. That's, and they're not doing anything wrong, But that's just not acceptable. We should not have to live with the quality of life. And so, I got introduced to a concierge physician, if I'm saying it right. And it's unbelievable. I've turned so many people onto this. I mean, so the way I'll explain it, and I want you to explain, your program to make sure it's aligning. But I mean, I could call him, text him, never have, but 3 a.m. I could be out of the country and they'll get right back to me. And I don't have to manage they'll make an appointment for me at the specialty doctors. To me, I call them the general contractor, right? It's one-stop shop. And, he'll, tell me what I have to do next. And I just think that's the greatest flex and the greatest. I mean, we get to the bottom of it, instantly. Am I explaining it correctly? And what have I missed?
Absolutely. And look, my dad was a family doc for 40 years in the same community. And I was a primary care doc for a decade before I came to this. I've got a lot of colleagues who I really respect who are primary care physicians, but the system is just not set up for giving us relationship-based care, which is what most of us crave. When you're a number, when your doctor is getting paid by something called relative value units, RVUs, it's literally the number of widgets they can push through the system means they get more money. So if it feels like you're rushed, if it feels like there's a lot of people on the schedule, it's because there probably is. And whether it's probably not their fault, they're probably not the ones saying, hey, I want to make as much money as possible, put as many patients on my schedule as you can. But 80% of physicians are employed by a health system or a health insurer. Out of 1 million licensed physicians in this country, 100,000 of them are employed by Optum or associated with Optum alone, which is United Health Group, a big insurer. And so a tenth of our physician workforce is associated with one insurer. And so they don't really have the autonomy. Back in my dad's generation, every physician was a small business owner. They graduated residency and hung up their shingle, and they were a private business, and they had to kind of earn and compete and have customer service.
This is before the big healthcare roll-ups, correct?
Exactly. Before all the consolidation and the HMOs. And there's been good things that have happened with those consolidations. But, I'm an independent physician, and I really believe that being independent allows me to have one boss and one boss only, and that's the patient. And I think that's what it all really comes down to, is I don't have an administrator telling me how many patients I need to see per day. I don't have an insurer saying, hey, this person has heart disease, you have to put them on a statin. Okay, well, they don't want to go on one, or there's a contraindication to that, or there's some other reason why. So we're not going to do that, right? And there's a lot of reasons why. And as a patient, as a physician, we deserve that autonomy to have that relationship with someone who cares about us and is accountable to us more than anyone else, more than the system overlords. And so, concierge medicine is one expression of that. There's direct primary care. There's other places where you can kind of go to get this kind of relationship-based care. But we don't answer the phone at 3 a.m., but everything else you said we do. So the next day...
he may not. I just mean that...
Yeah, I get it. But like the next business day... We're getting back to you. You have my text. You have my email. I have patients that DM me an article on Twitter and they're like, hey, what do you think about this?
I do that all the time. And
I love that. And it's because I don't have thousands of people constantly bombarding me. I've got my crew of patients.
So let's explain that if you didn't.
Yep.
Concierge doctors take a certain number.
We tend to take a smaller set. And so again, the typical primary care doc in this country has about 2,500, 3,000 patients on their panel. Most direct primary care concierge docs have 500 or 600. We have 200 because we don't want people to be overwhelmed. Again, we want to have plenty of time with you. And so you might be texting us, you might be calling us, we might be starting you on a peptide therapy or a hormone therapy, and we need to check in. It's not okay for us to wait 6 months and just see how you're doing and check in for 10 minutes. We should be getting labs within a few weeks. We should be having another conversation within a couple of months and really be proactive about these things. And so, we're kind of super concierge care in that way, and that we tend to be even more proactive and personalized in that sense.
All right, let's talk about, changing, and I'm sure it's always been, but it just seems like there's so much more. And I'm surprised, like, how many people and well-to-do people who, still, and might be coming from, their old school physician. But like, I've been on testosterone, and again, I'm never afraid to share with anybody because I think it's, so great since I was 40, 2 decades. And, I love it. And, it just put the bounce back in my step. It obviously cuts a little weight off it. You grow muscle easier at this age than you would without it. So you got that. You got peptides, which there's a whole flurry of stuff. Creatine, GLP-1s. I've been on that is probably for 3 years, and I tell everyone, I love it. It's and correct me if I'm wrong. There's, other than the side effects, which I've been able to, the only side effects I've come across or heard about or read about is the how you feel after you take it. And I changed to microdosing, and which it's eliminated the side effects. So I'll take, the shots multiple times a week versus once a week. So I'm taking lesser dose, and I don't have side effects. But not only the stubborn weight I couldn't lose, I lost, but I was never a big drinker, but I'd socially drink. I can't stand the taste of alcohol now, which isn't a bad thing to me. Like, I remember the first 20 times after I got on the, Ozempic or whatever it is, trizepatide, I'd go out, meet someone out for a drink and order a drink, and I could not finish the drink. Like, it was just like impossible for me to finish the drink. And, so like, that's, great. And I just saw a video on one of my TikTok or YouTube. I like to watch those. And I love this quote that someone said, and it might sound harsh, but they said, if you're an adult, middle-aged adult, they might have said, and you've struggled with an unhealthy lifestyle, weight, all that stuff. They said something to the effect that you're losing at life, at one of the key components of life. And I know that comes across harsh, but I mean, that affects us in every area. So, I threw a lot at you, and it's confusing. And, I'm still confused with I haven't, gone down the peptide other than the GLP-1s. Creatine, I'm like, that's being thrown at me. What do you suggest, for our listeners? What am I right about,
I'll react to a few of those things, and we can talk about some specific compounds. One is, often in this space, I'll get this question, and I'm like, well, aren't you just ultimately suggesting better sleep, diet, exercise, mental health? Well, yes, we are. And it's helpful, however, for me to say, hey, John, it's not just your cholesterol that's off or your hemoglobin A1C that's off. I've got
these blood pressure.
Yeah, I've got these 20 different data points that all point to a cliff coming up at some point in the next 10 years. Here's how the next decade is going to sort of play out or can play out. And when you can sort of describe it to people like that and give them a much more scientific answer around this. So, for example, even on your workouts, we check something called your VO2 max. This is where an athlete wears a mask and they're running on the treadmill, and it looks at your cardiac output, your respiratory capacity, the health of your blood vessels, the health it's actually measuring how many milliliters of oxygen per minute are using inside your cell to produce ATP, which is the energy that our cells use. And so we use that as a very structured scientific way to assess someone's cardiovascular output. And we have all these calculations that say we know that you're going to lose 10% of your VO2 max per decade. And if you want to be 80 years old and hiking the Rockies with your family or dancing at your granddaughter's wedding, you're going to need a VO2 max of 25 or 30, and you're at a 25 or 30 right now and you're 50. So we need to juice this up by 50% right now in order for you to live that kind of life that you need. And so we start with a very structured diagnostic base to understand where someone is. And then I think we build this very detailed intervention map around what's going to move the lever the most. Sleep is one of the biggest levers for most people. Then obviously exercise and diet and our sort of mental outlook on life. But, you mentioned a couple different things. One is, how do you think about some of these compounds and when to use them? I'd say most people, look, 70% of us are overweight or obese. 60% of us have diabetes or prediabetes. We have neurocognitive disease like dementia skyrocketing, cancer skyrocketing, childhood diabetes and obesity skyrocketing. I mean, what we're doing is obviously not working. And so anyone that says, well, just do the status quo or follow the guidelines, I would say, well, we followed the guidelines for 100 years or 50 years and look where we've gotten. And so, yes, what we are often trying to do is a very structured approach to improving someone's VO2 max and improving someone's muscle mass. But where we start is a more honest conversation. We say, John, you've been on this journey for 30 years. When's the last time you felt really good? If they say, well, 30 years ago when I was 16, then you start to ask the question like, well, what's going to change now? Is there going to be some major catalyst in your life? Are you going to change your job so that now you have a lot of time for training? Do you have some sort of childcare thing that you're going to graduate into? Or what is it? And most people don't really have a good answer. And so then you're left with saying, okay, well, I think we need something to give you some momentum. We need something to start to shift your life a little bit. We need some sort of boost to give you a little bit of reassurance that you got to keep this sort of virtuous cycle going. So that's where things like, I think, GLP-1s and hormone replacement therapy can be very, very powerful. There are morbidly obese people, and that's an actual diagnosis that we use with BMI over 35, and they're having true complications, and those are the people that these medications are really meant for. But I think there are plenty of folks in this obese and overweight category, BMI of 25 to 35 or so, which, it doesn't take much. Most people are actually probably have a lot more adipose than they realize. A lot more fat tissue than they realize. And if you really look at the stats, again, more than half of people probably fall into this category of just having too much fat tissue. And so when we look at that in a structured way, we get a DEXA scan on all of our patients. We look at subcutaneous fat and visceral fat and lean muscle. And so we do the actual calculation. And, we know that for men, a subcutaneous fat somewhere between 12 and 18% is the most correlated with longevity. For women, somewhere between 20 and 20. And so if you're above that, then we have to have the discussion of how are we going to cut some of that adipose down? How are we going to add some of that muscle so that you're functionally independent as an adult or as a senior and give you everything that you need to get there? And so that's when some of these tools come into play. If someone says, look, I'm already working out as much as I think I am. I feel like I'm doing my best with the diet. I just need a little extra here. That's where we also only microdose usually on the GLPs, and we start low and use the absolute minimum viable dose necessary to curb someone's appetite just enough to make sure that they're getting enough protein, that they're getting enough substrate, that they're getting enough, nutrients and electrolytes, but where they look at the pizza and they don't want the third and the fourth and the fifth slice. They're good after a couple of pieces. They look at the dessert and they have a bite or two and they're fine. They don't want to have it. It's actually interesting. You mentioned the alcohol thing. There are all sorts of studies ongoing right now, but anecdotes abound around people decreasing tobacco use and alcohol and gambling and other compulsive addictions. So it's certainly these GLPs are certainly hacking our dopamine circuits in our brain, and the same kind of quote unquote hit we get from the fried food or the sweet dessert or whatever it is the same thing that we get from some of these dangerous substances as well. And so we do notice a decrease in consumption along those lines as well. So we could go really deep down the peptide alley. The FDA just had advisory committee at least voted to push through half a dozen peptides to be on the bulk compounding list now. And so the FDA will take that under advisement and vote on that in the coming month or two, which will really open up the aperture even more to this space. But I think whether the traditional system wants it or not, patients are accessing these kinds of therapies and finding these kinds of compounds to utilize. So it's incumbent on physicians to understand what's happening, to, sort of engage in harm reduction where we can and guide people to the safe places and to give them the best guidance that we can.
So is it me, or is it the golden era of, health resources? I mean, I don't remember a time, and maybe because I was younger, I didn't care or, think I needed it, but it just seems like we have so many resources to us that the world never had in the past.
Yeah, I definitely think there's this cultural zeitgeist amongst upon us, I think, that is happening where even the young people, you see the decrease in amount of alcohol consumption, but bachelorette parties are now going to do cold plunges and infrared instead of going to get wasted in Nashville or whatever, right? And there's all sorts
Right.
of, I think, tip of the spear sort of cultural things that are happening that show people are really engaged and excited about this. We're still early in this. I mean, again, I love where I live, and I was just at the Ohio State Fair, and it's really good people watching. But, you look around and you realize like this message probably resonates to those of us in our small echo chambers, but most of the population is still living under the spell of a pretty
Yeah.
unhealthy lifestyle. So we have a long way to go, but I do think that we are really starting to see that shift where the cool thing now is being healthy. I think, without getting too heady and philosophical with it, like where the next decade or two go with AI and things like universal basic income and how it's going to redefine people's identity and purpose because their whole job or sectors are sort of changed. The one thing that we're still going to have to work towards is kind of our health in some ways. And I think it'll be interesting, the GLPs we have now an oral class of these coming out. It might be 20 years from now that we live in that futuristic sci-fi where we all just take the pill that keeps us healthy and happy all day, every day. And that's kind of where we are. But I do think that kind of the new flex is being healthy as well, because it's the one
Yeah.
thing you sort of have to work towards in a lot of ways. Even as you mentioned, the TRT, people have this misconception that they just start
Yeah,
taking
I'm sorry. Explain what TRT is just for some of our
that's
listeners.
testosterone replacement therapy. Some guys will come to us and believe that if they just get on this magic molecule that their lives will change, but you have to put the work in, right? You actually have to give it the substrate needed to got to do the workouts. And then, yes, it will probably help supercharge you a little bit, but you have to do that kind of work. And so I do think that
I say that about GLP-1s. They're not a diet, right? You could still, you'll eat less, but if you're still eating the pizza and the pastry and the stuff,
unfortunately, what the studies showed is for some folks early on, about 40% of the weight loss with GLPs were from muscle and other organ tissues. And then another set of data is around the number of people that regain the weight after coming off the GLP is pretty high. And so they've lost muscle mass and fat to some degree, but then they put it all back on once they come back off and come off the medication, and then that's all fat. And so we've kind of replaced muscle for fat. And then we have to decide, are we meaning for people to be on these medications lifelong or not? That's not how we see it. I'm sure pharma would love a recurring revenue customer for life. But what we see, John, is what you're doing, which is microdosing for a year or two, kind of work at it. But in that year or two, our job is to work together to change your lifestyle in a way that if you were to slowly start stepping down off of that you wouldn't run back to the pizza and the ice cream, the overeating. You've now changed your life. You've lost 50 pounds, but you also don't like the way alcohol makes you feel the next day. You also don't like the way pizza makes you feel. You also know how to count macros, and you know how to partition food. You know how to front load protein. And so we have to build, that's part of why our practice is this whole comprehensive approach. Is it's not just about going to fill out some survey and getting a GLP-1 and getting checked in on once or twice a year. We use this as a tool. You will be seeing our dietitian. You'll be working at our training program. You'll be logging your workouts. You'll be meeting with your doc quarterly. You'll be meeting with your health coach. And all of that helps lead to success so that once we step you off of this, then you don't need it anymore. And your new life allows you to sort of sustain that long term. That's how I think we should really be using these medications long term.
Agreed. I say, today, I'm not surprised by the people. And when I say people, it could be neighbors, people, or it could be celebrities, right? I'm not surprised by the people who are on GLP-1s. I'm surprised by the people who aren't. Like, it just amazes me, but it's education, it's resources, it's knowing, the right place to go and trust versus just going on the third market. And, that's a little dangerous. Listen, as I say, this is the golden era. I feel like, and hopefully I'm wrong here, but in my experience, I feel like for men, we've had a lot of stuff, but I feel like there's not a lot of clinics or doctors around for women. Is that catching up? Do you guys take both men and women? And am I correct or am I wrong on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think historically there have been a lot of these like testosterone clinics around every corner and whatever. And I think, a lot of them earned a bad reputation. There's a lot of women's health clinics that earned a bad reputation as well, doing these pellets and things like that. But it is a growing, burgeoning sort of, investment field. But, I don't really see it as different. Like, we're all human beings, and it's just different aspects of the same kind of care. There's very different kinds of things that go into men's and women's health. We have an entire women's health team led by all women, women physicians and researchers and health coaches and team members. So yes, we definitely take women. We do perimenopausal care. We do hormone replacement therapy for women. I think all of our female docs are Menopause Society trained. And so it is important. It is growing. But, we really think that families, couples doing this together, going through similar experiences together, have a much higher degree chance of success. And so what we sort of encourage is bringing your significant on with you if you can.
Yeah. All right. If someone's thinking about this, getting healthier, which I know it's always on everyone's radar, what's 3 pieces of advice you'd give? And then after that, how do people find out more about Velocity Health?
First, I'd start with your sleep. I think too many of us are underappreciating how important sleep is as a pillar. There's an interesting recent study that came out that kind of triangulated around 6.5, 6 to 7.5 hours or so is kind of the sweet spot. So many people I talk to wake up at 2 and 3 in the morning, minds race, thinking about whatever, can't get back to sleep, and it plays out in the rest of their lives. So figure out what's wrong with your sleep and work with people who understand why. So that's probably piece of guidance number 2, which is you can only manage what you measure. So measure things in the right kind of way, but under the right kind of guidance. So, I don't think people should get neurotic about wearables, but I do think it's helpful to do things like sleep tracker, continuous glucose monitor, all the things that we mentioned, things like the full body MRI and genetics. You do that with a team that really understands these things and can help put it into context. And lastly, I would say that, which is find a team, or at least a physician who understands these concepts, is not going to just dismiss you, is not going to treat you patriarchally and just, rush you out of their office within 10 or 12 minutes, but treat you like a human being, treat you like a friend, treat you like someone who cares about their health more than anyone else in this world, because obviously you do, about your own health. And so you should be looking for a partner who's willing to have the long format discussions with you more than anything. We think that that's all what we provide here at Velocity Health. People can find us at velocityhealthclinic.com. velocityhealthclinic.com. Again, we are available in all 50 states. We exist outside the insurance sort of construct, so we're all cash pay, and we have several different programs, from a one-time assessment, sort of our version of the executive physical, to a program just focus on peptides and hormones to sort of more the flagship Concierge, all inclusive program that has all the cardiac and cancer screening and things like that as well. So we'd love to have you. We're growing. For any of you that are business owners as well, we work with employers too. So if you're thinking about a cool executive perk or for retention, recruitment, doing something for your top tier team or rewarding your sales team or whatever it is, by giving them the gift of health, by giving them the gift of a doctor who will actually wrap around them in this way and a team that understands them deeply in this way, then we're always happy to chat about that too. We've worked with several others like that.
Your velocityhealthclinic.com will be in the show notes along with your book. I actually went to velocityhealth.com and it wasn't you. So
Right.
let's be clear about that. It's velocityhealthclinic.com.
Correct.
Dr. Deep, it was such a pleasure. I really enjoyed our conversation and what you're doing. And I think it's critical that we all live the best version that we can for those who it impacts. So thank you for your time and what you're doing out there for people's well-being.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And thank you for spreading this message and bringing this to your audience. And I'm glad you're taking care of yourself in this kind of way and it's resonating. But I think you're right that we are at this moment in time. So I hope the rest of you all listening found some benefit to this, and we'd love to chat. So appreciate being on, John.
All right. Thank you, revolutionaries, for joining us for another episode of the Customer Service Revolution podcast. We will see you next week.
What separates world-class customer service companies from everyone else? One significant factor is having someone dedicated to designing and managing the customer's experience. The Customer Experience Executive Academy trains leaders to excel at this. Find out how to enroll now. Contact Claudia at thedijuliusgroup.com for details.